In the NFL, running backs specialize in jukes, fakes, and spins. But elite defenders can read those moves and take down even the best ball carriers. For this test, we brought in one of the NFL's biggest, strongest, and fastest defenders, Tank Johnson. At 6'3", 300 pounds, this tank is built for stopping ground assault. And he helped anchor the Bears' defense during their run to the 2006 Super Bowl.
I like hitting anything. Anytime I get an opportunity to lay a lick on somebody without getting in trouble for it, I'm going to do it.
Rodeo clown, Travis Adams. Travis and his fellow clowns actually prefer to be called bullfighters, because when a cowboy gets thrown or jumps off a raging bull, these fearless athletes jump in, throwing themselves in harm's way to distract the bull and protect the rider. But unlike a running back, if he makes one wrong move, he's not just going to lose a few yards. He could lose his life.
Every time you step out there in front of a bull, it's a life or death situation. You know, there's guys that have lost their life doing what we do.
Can this bullfighter avoid a bull rush?
He's here to make people laugh. I'm here to make people cry. We'll see who gets their job done.
It's time to see if our NFL stud can take down this crafty clown.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let me out. Let me out. Hey, clown. Let's go. Let's go.
So how many of you like football? How many of you like rodeo? Okay. And which would you rather have? What would you rather be hit by? One of them big fellers, football players, or a bull? Which one would you prefer? The football player? How about the bull? Yeah, me neither. Yeah, we got some construction going on here. Hold on. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. That works. Thank you very much. Cool. All right. Yeah, I would rather be hit by a football player than I would a bull for sure. 1,800-pound bull does not sound like much fun to get hit by. So how many of you been to a rodeo where a clown really got smashed good, or a bullfighter? Yeah, it's quite a deal, isn't it? Pretty good deal. Well, let me just welcome you to week number 3 of our series called Dangerous God. And in this series, what we're talking about is what it means to be a man in God's world, what it means as men to be created in God's image. And what we've discovered so far, basically, is that the reason why God created Adam to begin with was to reveal a side of himself that might otherwise be kind of hidden from our sight, especially from the sight of women. You know, women see men as being, well, we are totally different, aren't we? And the women are totally different from us. Well, let me just say as I begin, though, that we have a team of people here that give on a regular basis to keep this ministry going. I really appreciate your regular monthly giving, because that's what keeps us in business. As a matter of fact, we're kind of struggling at this point, like all the rest of the economy. So just pray and ask God what He would have you do in regard to that. The fact is, if we can find out, well, I think a better question to ask, rather than what is a man, or what do men do, or what did God create men to be, those kind of things. I think a better question is to ask, what is God like, and who is God? Because if we can answer that question, then we can also answer the question of what God has created us to be as men, because, hey, if that's what God is like, then He's created us to be that in the same way, because we have been created in God's image. So that's why God created Adam to begin with, was to reveal that side of himself that is very much the fearless warrior, the protector, the defender. Certainly, there are times in a man's life when we need to be soft and tender and kind and gentle and those kind of things. But there's also that side of men that is very, very fierce and very much warrior-like. Matter of fact, from the beginning of time, the problem with understanding men and women, for that matter, that women face in understanding men, since we're talking about that particular subject today, is that certainly there is that fearless warrior side of men, that side of men that women probably consider to be undomesticated, and I think that's true. Men in a real sense are undomesticated. They were created outside the garden. Women were created inside the garden in the beauty and the luxury of it all. And men were created outside the garden. And then God placed man in the garden. And the problem is that the wild side of man, that undomesticated side of men, is probably the side of men that women are initially attracted to in many ways. And yet, once they caught you, then they want to domesticate you. Turn you into something that's more tender and more soft. Well, if we let that happen, then there's going to be a problem that happens with our lives, because what happens if that happens with our lives, if we allow ourselves to be completely domesticated, then she begins to wonder where the man went, and also begins to wonder where all the passion went in the marriage. On the other side of that, on the guy's side of that, we begin to resent her, and what she requires of us and those kind of things, what she wants us to be like. So let me ask you this question, guys. How would you describe yourself as a man? Do words like passionate and courageous and dangerous come to mind when you think about yourself? If not, then we probably have some work to do as far as understanding who God is. And that's what we're doing in this series, is trying to understand who God is and what God is like, since we have been created in His image. So the specific question I want to explore today with you is God adventurous? Is God a dangerous God? Does He do things that are what most people would consider be beyond reasonable? Is that who God is? Is God like that? Does God like to live dangerously? Quite honestly, because I think guys do. We like to live dangerously in a lot of ways. Not that women don't, but I think guys are more given to that than what women are in many ways. So I don't believe that there's any doubt, in my mind there isn't any doubt, that preachers and teachers and theologians and those kind of people throughout time have basically reduced God to something that is less than dangerous and less than adventurous in that sense of the word. Kind of domesticated God with man-made religion and those kinds of things. I think that we see that. We talked a little bit about that last week. As a matter of fact, most of us have come to see God as more like I'm going to liken it to a chess-playing God. God's playing chess, but He's playing chess with Himself, so He can't lose, right? I mean, He's in charge of everything, and He controls this world and all those kind of things, so He's a chess-playing God. But when you're playing both sides of the board, there isn't any chance of losing. So where is the danger? Where is the adventure? Where is the risk in any of that, right? I mean, if you think about God in those terms, and I think most of us have, and we've probably been raised that way in a very real sense, that, hey, God's in charge, and the end is going to be like He wants it to be, no matter what. And so, He's playing both sides of the board. Where's the danger in that? Where's the risk in that? So, in answer to that question, I think that what we need to see is that God probably took the greatest risk of all when He created man. And not that He just created man, but that He created man or mankind with the ability to make our own choices, with a free will. That's risk. To create us in the first place is one thing, but then to create us with a free will to be able to make our own decisions anytime we want to, pretty risky. Pretty risky. Well, why is that risky? Well, because, just like creating man with free will means that he has the ability to reject God if he wants to, if we want to. We have that ability. We have the ability to make our own choices, and by default that means that we can reject God. Now let me also say something here, because I think it's important that we understand that a lot of us, maybe I better speak for myself, that are part of my thinking processes have kind of categorized that. And of course, men are really good at categorizing things, right? We've got our little boxes, and we put this in that box and this in that box, and there's nothing in this box. That's the one I like the best. You know, that's where we go when things get tough. We go to our nothing box, and we think about nothing. You know, if you ask him what he's thinking about and he says nothing, believe him. Seriously, there's nothing going on up there, dude. You know, it's just it. He's in his nothing box, and that's where he's at. But you know, with that freedom that we have to be able to reject God, it's not a one-time thing. And that's what I was going to say is that in my way of thinking, whether I directly thought about it or not, probably hadn't. I always thought about, well, Adam and Eve made an initial choice, and then from that point on, hey, it's, you know, it's all just, it's out there, right? But that's where the problem was with that one choice. Well, no, there's a lot more to it than that, because sure, they made the one choice, but then they continued to make that same choice over and over and over and over again, right? And we do the same thing in our lives. We have the choice to reject God, but we can continue to do that right up to and including the day that we check out of this world. We can still continue to make that choice of rejecting God, the very one who created us and created us with the ability to reject Him. See the risk? That God created us with the ability to reject Him, and He's the one who created us. And we can reject Him right up until the day we check out of this world, and then that's it, right? The rejection is final. That's the risk God took in making Adam and Eve, and even the angels with the ability to make choices. Remember Lucifer, Satan? He was made by God with the ability to make his own choices, with that free will. Now, at one point in time, Satan definitely made that choice and decided, hey, I can do this by myself. I can do this on my own, right? And he rejected God, became his own God, and now we know him as being that antecedent to God, if you want to say it that way. So that's where we're at, and God is a risk-taking God in that sense. Well, think about it this way, and I want to answer a question here as we kind of look at it in this direction. Does God cause anyone to sin? Does God actually make someone sin? I don't believe He does. Matter of fact, the answer is absolutely not. Of course not. Paul asked that question in Galatians chapter 2 and verse 17. He said, "But if while seeking to be justified in Christ, we ourselves have also been found sinners, is Christ then a minister of sin?" Well, no. May it never be. No, we still make our own choices, right? We still make our own choices. That's us doing that, not Him doing that for us. So the fact is, since God never makes anyone sin, then He can't be playing both sides of the board. He can't be playing both sides of the board. We either make our own choices or we don't, right? We all still make our own choices every day. Nor does God stop people from committing horrible crimes here on this earth either, right? Okay, one of the questions I get asked as often as anything else, and probably you have asked that question, I've asked that question, I think everybody asks that question at some time or another, especially if there's a time in your life when things come crashing down, you know, when life just goes to hell for you, is that we often want to ask the question, you know, when tragedy strikes our lives, why didn't God stop this from happening, right? Why didn't God stop the bullet that was fired and killed an innocent person? Why does God allow teenagers to get pregnant, right? I mean, especially when they're way, way too young to even know what they're doing, right? Why does God let abortionists kill innocent children? Why does God allow that stuff, right? I mean, so the question is, and the question I'm always asked is, and you've asked that, I'm sure, I've asked that, couldn't God stop those things from happening? Well, the answer is yes. He could. Yes, He could. Absolutely, no doubt. But you got to know that if He did, He'd then be playing both sides of the board. He would be usurping His authority over ours. I don't care who it is. I know we like to look at other people and say, well, you know, they shouldn't have that authority. Well, maybe they shouldn't. But you know, there's times in our lives when we shouldn't have that authority either. We make bad choices all the time. All of us do, whether we want to admit it or not. So I got to tell you that God threw caution to the wind when He created man, and with the freedom to not only reject Him, but also to commit horrendous crimes against innocent people. That's the risk God took. But you know what? He had children anyway. He took the risk, and He continually takes the risk. I mean, when it comes to our own safety, what do? You know, when it comes to our own safety, we wear our seat belts, we watch our cholesterol, we watch what we eat, we drive the speed limit. Well, maybe not that one. You know, all in an effort to be safe, right? To keep ourselves safe. But the way I read it, God doesn't. God doesn't do that kind of stuff. God really is not one to play it safe, guys. God isn't one to play it safe all the time. Like, you know, we always think we're supposed to or ought to or have to. Even though God knew what would happen when He created Adam and Eve, He did it anyway. God knew what the result was going to be, but He did it anyway. And even though He knew that we would reject Him, and Adam and Eve would reject Him, and mankind would reject Him from that point on, and we still have that ability to, every moment of every day, to do that anyway, God made Adam and Eve, and God created you and me. God had children anyway. So there's no doubt in my mind, I'm convinced that God is adventurous. God is a risk-taking God. And it's obvious His risk, the risk that He took, had staggering consequences. Look at the world we live in. The consequences are staggering. So, here's a question. How does God handle this horrible turn of events? That's not what He intended to begin with, is it? When He created Adam and Eve and put them in that perfect garden, in this perfect world at that time, there was a horrible turn of events, wasn't there? And that's what brought us to where we're at today. Well, how did He handle that? How did He handle the fact that the very crown of His creation, the very being that He created to be most like Him, turned their backs on Him and walk away and never want to see Him again? You know? Well, I'll tell you what God did. He willingly accepted the challenge. He willingly accepted the challenge. Actually, not only does He cheerfully accept the challenge, but He turns that whole process, or that whole mess, if you want to call that, into the world's greatest adventure. That's what He does with it. He turns it into the world's greatest adventure, taking the worst of situations and making them into danger-filled, hair-raising adventures. So, I mean, judging by the stories that are recorded for us in the Bible, God likes adventure. He loves risk. He likes that. Let me show you what I mean. And this is really where I want to come to today. I want to bring you through all that so that you can understand what's going on here. Check this out. In 1 Samuel 17, there's a story about a man by the name of Goliath. And we're going to read that story together here right quick. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. That's 9 feet 9 inches tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. That's 125 pounds of armor. He also had bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. That's a full 17 pounds. And the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. That's 15 pounds. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to drop up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me." Okay? "If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Probably all of you have heard about that story if you haven't ever actually specifically read it. There it is, the story of David and Goliath, right? So it's really cool to, when you read that story, it's really interesting. So here's Goliath, right? He's almost 10 feet tall. That's what this ladder is doing here. This ladder is, when it's spread out, it's a 10-foot ladder, but when it's spread out like this, it is 9 feet, 9 inches tall, exactly. I measured it. That's how tall Goliath was. 9 feet, 9 inches tall, almost 10 feet tall. Big feller. Yeah. And he wasn't a skinny little feller either. You know, I mean, we see tall people sometimes today, don't we? And matter of fact, the tallest man on earth right now is really lanky and thin and very, very frail, you know. But Goliath was a highly trained soldier, a big man, not just a skinny little feller, but he was tall and big to begin as well. Here a few weeks ago, and Tiny, you may have seen him, there's a New Mexico cop that came into Rudy's here a few weeks ago. And he had to duck to get through the door, so I'm going to say he was close to 7 feet tall, but he wasn't skinny. He was a big guy. Got to be one of the biggest men I've ever seen, you know. I've ever seen. He was huge, great big guy, New Mexico cop. If he came to my door, if he stopped me for something, I'd just say, yes, sir, you know. I mean, he'd have to get on his knees and then bend over to look in your window. You know, I don't know, maybe not, but some of the little cars you guys drive, that'd probably be happening. You know. I didn't think he was out there. You didn't? Yeah, well, I'm not as big as you either, so. As a matter of fact, Goliath was so big and so well trained and so dangerous that they couldn't find one single man among the Israelite army who stood a snowball's chance in hell of even standing up against him in the least. Matter of fact, the Bible says in 1 Samuel 17:11 that when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, I always thought that Saul was mentioned just because he was the king, right? How many of you ever thought that? Maybe you never gave it a thought. I always thought he was just mentioned there because he was the king. He's the leader of the army, right? That's why they mentioned him. Saul, the leader of the army, the king, he was there with the rest of the army and there wasn't anybody found. I mean, maybe Saul looked around trying to find somebody. I think there's more to it than that. I think it's a comparison between Goliath and Saul, because if you remember your Old Testament, you might remember that Saul was chosen as king mostly because he was head and shoulders taller than anybody else in Israel and more handsome than anybody else. See, he's the biggest guy there. That's why I think Saul is mentioned. He's the biggest guy there. And it said he looked throughout the army to find somebody else who was bigger. Because he was too chicken himself. Right? I mean, if a 10-foot man, 9'9" man, were to stand out in the parking lot here today, or maybe stand out in your driveway of your house, you know, and threaten you or threaten us. Let's say you stand out here today, 10-foot guy, and he's standing out here threatening us. Who would we send? Sheldon? He's dispensable, yeah. We'd probably look and find the biggest, meanest looking fella we could find here, and he would probably say, I'm not the guy, you know. Okay, if you had your choice of people, who would you choose? Rosie Greer? How many of you remember Rosie Greer? Big guy, right? Or maybe The House. How many of you know who The House is? Yeah, he's a football player. Or maybe The Rock. What do you think about The Rock? He'd be a big guy. He's a big, stout guy. Matter of fact, Rosie Greer and The Rock are basically same size guys. 6'5", 265 pounds. Big guys. Big guys. John Taylor is the guy by the name that's called The House. And he plays for Central Penn's Piranhas. How many of you ever heard of him? Nobody? Yeah, he's a big guy. He's 6'11", weighs 500 pounds, and wears a 6X jersey. He's a big feller. Yeah. Did you know that the tallest man living today is a man by the name of Sultan Kosen from Turkey, who is 8'3" tall? Goliath was 9'9". 8'3". Okay, that's a big guy. They say his hands measure from his wrist to the tip of his fingers is over 12 inches long. His feet are 14 inches long. He's a big guy. But he's skinny and frail. Goliath was still way taller than him, 2 feet taller than him, and a big guy. Right? A big guy. So this guy, as tall as he is, and if he were here, I mean, that's still a big, tall guy. Goliath is a lot taller than that, was a lot taller than that. He would even look like a shrimp up next to Goliath. I watched a video on YouTube of this guy, and he's so frail and, I guess that's the best word, so frail and thin that he can hardly get around. He has to walk around with crutches all the time and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's kind of pathetic in a lot of ways. But Goliath was nothing like that. He was huge, huge man. Okay, so here's the funny part. Here's the funny part. Who does God choose to go up against Goliath? You know the answer. A little skinny teenage boy who tends sheep. He says, that's the guy I want. Take him and send him out there, you know. That's the guy he called. David, a shepherd boy, a little skinny shepherd boy to go up against Goliath. No, he doesn't choose Saul. He doesn't choose a big guy. God chooses the littlest guy. Not even one of the soldiers. He wasn't even a soldier. When they put armor on him from one of the soldiers, he couldn't carry it. He was too little and too thin. He didn't even have the strength to carry a regular man's armor, much less, you know, the armor that Saul had on, 125 pounds. So now tell me, God doesn't have a love for danger. He does. God likes to make the story dangerous and hair-raising, you know? Like, there's no way this can turn out, right? There's no way this can come out. You can't convince me that God doesn't love the thrill and the risk of adventure. And the Bible is full of those kinds of stories all the time. All over the place. God is dwindling the armies of Israel down, not building them up. Why? Because it's God that's doing it, not man. Because it's God that's in charge here, not us. So when Goliath comes up against the Israelite army, God sends out, when Goliath comes out, God sends out a small boy. What, maybe this tall? I don't know. You know? Maybe 16 years old? I don't know. A young boy, tending sheep for his dad. Would you like your son to go up against a man like Goliath? No, me neither. They tried to talk him out of it. But hey, David had already been called by God. He knew what he was called to do, and he did the job, didn't he? Listen, if there's anything that we can learn from all of this, if there's anything to be learned from all of these wild and crazy stories that are found in the Bible, is that God is not one to limit his risks. As a matter of fact, if anything, he makes his risk greater. God is not one to cover all the bases, you know, to make sure everything's good. No, he takes the story and turns it into a hair-raising adventure. Listen, that is the God in whose image we were created as men. That's whose image we were created in. For adventure, for risk, for doing what it takes, you know. So I'm going to tell you, take the risk, you know. Enjoy the adventure. Be the warrior in whose image you bear. Right? Be the warrior in whose image you've been created. Because the Lord is a warrior, Exodus tells us. The Lord is his name. God bless you all.